All righty, welcome everyone to another amazing CMX webinar. As everyone's rolling in here, we'll give everyone a sec to get settled in, get ready for the webinar. We're very excited today to have one of our CMX Summit speakers joining us to talk about the joyful topic of loneliness for the next hour.
You're gonna have so much fun, you guys, I promise.
It's gonna be super fun.
I cry. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be awesome.
Oh, it's gonna get real vulnerable real quick. All right, cool. Welcome everyone. If you're here for the first time at a CMX webinar, this is where we get to talk to the top experts in the community field, learn about building community for businesses, just learn about community and society, learn about broader topics that are relevant to our field. So we run these webinars generally once a month. Right now they're happening every week as we're leading up to CMX Summit. CMX Summit is coming up in just a few weeks, September 5th and 6th in Redwood City. And Jillian, who we're speaking with today, is one of our speakers amongst, I think we have over 65 other speakers this year, all talking about community strategy. It's going to be a great event. So everyone who comes to this webinar, you're all going to get a discount code, which I'll share in just a few minutes. Yeah, hope a lot of you are going to be joining us at the events. Cool. Well, why don't we just get started with an introduction, and I'll share a little bit about what we have coming up for the events, and you can share a little bit about what you're going to be speaking about there. But first of all, everyone, please give a huge welcome to Jillian Richardson.
Hi.
Jillian is the founder of the Joylist, which is a company she's been running to bring people together, reduce loneliness in the real world. And she is also the author of the very new book, Unlonely Planet. Brand spanking new. When did it come out?
It came out 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. So Unlonely Planet is now available, so you can all go purchase it. Sam will be here in the chat in the webinar sharing links, so he just shared the link to the book, so you can grab it right now. And so the way this is going to work is Jillian and I are going to chat for the next hour. We're going to take any questions you have. You can post in the Facebook group if you're watching there. You can also post it right in the webinar in the Q&A or in the chat. We're watching all of them to see what questions you have. And either we'll slot it in during the conversation if it's relevant, or we'll hold it till the end of the discussion to answer it then. All right, so if you have any questions, make sure to type it in. And Jillian, welcome.
Thank you.
Anything that you'd like to share about your work and your background that I didn't share, so people get a little bit of an idea of who you are?
Yeah, I think some context around the Joylist is that it's a weekly newsletter that I send out, and I feature events that have a facilitated moment of connection in New York City. Because there's a lot of newsletters that send out, for example, art galleries and places to get dinner and movie screenings and things where it's very easy to go and receive something and leave without really having a connection with somebody else, especially if you have social anxiety. And so the events that have helped me the most are the spaces where there's somebody there to help you drop your walls and actually be vulnerable with somebody else. So that could look like a movie screening followed by a conversation. It could be a facilitated dinner party. It could be a women's circle, anything like that. And so I feature 2 events that fall within that category for every day of the week in New York City. And we will be expanding around the world this year. Oh, I can't hear your voice, David.
I muted myself. That's really exciting. There around creating vulnerability and creating those spaces for people to be able to have that experience. And your book just came out. Maybe give us like the 2-minute overview of what the book's about, and I think that's also what you're going to be speaking about at CMX Summit. So maybe the quick idea of what they'll learn there.
Yeah, so Unlonely Planet, the subtitle is How Healthy Congregations Can Change the World. And when a lot of people hear the word congregation, they immediately assume church. When in reality, if you look up in the Webster Dictionary what congregate means, it's really just a group of people coming together. And when I was writing the book, I was really looking for a word that symbolizes a really powerful, deep, and rich community where there are people who you can rely on, who are there to help you, where it's your chosen family. And I couldn't really find a word that fit. So I chose the word congregation because when done right, a church congregation is a really beautiful thing. And a lot of the religious makeup in America now is radically different than it was 50 years ago. The number one religion in America is none. And so where do we go to find this deep sense of community, to live our values, to have people there to support us when we're going through something that's difficult? And so I argue 7 different ways that you can create this congregation for yourself, because really it's up to us. Most people are not leaning on the church or a synagogue or an organized religion anymore. So how can we create that sense of connection for ourselves? And that's what the book is really about.
Love it. It's a very important, relevant topic. I think everyone in the CMX audience can probably relate to a lot of what's in there and apply a lot of what's in there. So it's a good audience for you to be reaching with your message, since everyone here is in some way building community.
Exactly. That's why whoever is watching right now, I'm in love with all of you. You're my favorite type of people. This community is so special. I love it.
It is. I love it too.
Not biased at all.
Why I spend every day on it. Cool. So real quick before we dive into the discussion, Jillian will be presenting at CMX Summit. We'll have 1,000 other community professionals there from all over the world, all different organizations. If you're watching this webinar, we hope you'll join us as well. And you'll get 20% off because you came to this webinar if you buy your ticket by Monday and use the code Jillian Webinar. So Jillian, just like Jillian's name, webinar, no spaces, all lowercase. Sam will post it here in the chat as well, so you have the link. By Monday, you'll get 20% off your ticket to CMX Summit. All right, so you'll get to see Jillian really do her work live at the events. Yeah. All right, cool. So let's dive in. And I think like a good place to start would be to just kind of get an overview of where we're at. I think most of us in this network are aware of, you know, what's being called a loneliness epidemic and some of the challenges right now around people being lonely around the world. Can you maybe help us paint that picture a little more clearly and share kind of like, what is the state that we're in? Why is this so important to be talking about?
Yeah. So exactly what you said, it's totally spot on. It is a loneliness epidemic. And the word, it feels kind of dramatic, but it's really not. So some statistics is one, that the average American has one close friend. The average American, or 75% of Americans, are not satisfied with the friendships that they do have. So just those 2 numbers alone, the average person has one friend, 3/4 of people are not satisfied with their friendships. Another statistic is the average American has not made a new friend in 5 years. And this is just a study that came out. It's been published on Vox. It's all over the internet. Is that 1/4 of millennials, 1/4 say that they have no friends. And there's a huge health impact with that. So you've probably all heard the statistic of being lonely has the same impact on early mortality as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So that means this is taking 7 years off of your life. And that's the same as being obese. That's the same as being an excessive drinker. And think about how many times in health class growing up, for example, you were taught about the importance of eating healthy. You were taught about the dangers of binge drinking. And we never talk about the importance of social connection and the importance of intimacy in our lives and platonic touch and all of these things that increase our lifespan more than anything else. Yet there's kind of just this assumption that we know how to create connection in our lives, when really it's a skill just like anything else, and we need to be taught, and we need to be taught that it's important.
So there's a lot of like really interesting stats there that I've definitely been following. I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious, have you seen data that shows, are we much worse off in terms of loneliness now than we were before? Or have we always just kind of had a lot of loneliness and maybe we're just really focusing on it now?
Yeah, well, there's a direct connection between social media usage and loneliness, but in a specific instance. So I do not remember who said this to me, but it's stuck in my head so much of some people use social media to connect and some people use social media to compare. And when you use social media to connect, it does enhance your sense of belonging. So for example, I every week-ish post a gratitude post on Facebook and I shout out all the people in my life who've been supporting me. And it just feels like a really beautiful way to show love for the people in my life. But then sometimes I can go onto Instagram and I'm scrolling through and there's all these women who weigh like 60 pounds less than me and they're on a beach in the Bahamas, and immediately my brain goes into comparison mode and I'm saying, I'm not as good as this person and I'm not as beautiful as this person, I'm not as popular as this person. And that's when it gets dangerous. And I think a big reason why millennials are the loneliest generation and a quarter of us say we don't have any friends is because we're so comfortable with this really kind of safe connection behind screens. And that Brene Brown talks about this a lot, that being vulnerable and trying to belong in a community is hard work. It takes a lot of effort to really go to a new place, make new friends, be somewhere where we don't know anyone. And because there's kind of these like low quality communities online where it feels a little bit like connection, but it's safe, it's way easier to stay hidden in that space.
Yeah, so I think that's a lot of what we're seeing now are these online community social networks are connecting us, but it's very shallow,
Yeah.
lacking that depth and meaning that we actually need in order to not feel lonely.
Yeah. And even if it is a really beautiful community, so for example, maybe a community for people who have chronic illnesses and people are being really vulnerable, they're sharing, they feel less alone, that can be awesome. And we still need in-person connection. And especially, this is a thing I talk a lot about in the book, is platonic touch. That so many people are undertouched, and that can result in like assault, it can result in depression, anger, and it almost sounds silly, but just like getting enough hugs in a day makes such a huge difference in terms of happiness, in terms of feeling, one, connected to our own bodies and loving of our own bodies, and also loving and connected to other people. When I was younger, I didn't have a lot of platonic touch in my life. I suffered from an eating disorder when I was younger. I was anorexic. And I really think if I had deeper relationships and I had people who I could snuggle with and cuddle with, I would have loved myself so much more. And again, it's a thing where it seems maybe obvious, or it seems like, oh, that's weird that you're the person who's asking for a 20-second hug. And it feels vulnerable, a little bit awkward. But really, it's so important for our health.
That's really interesting. I haven't heard that before, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to unpack in there, but before we do, I'm curious, all those stats that were shared were based in America. Is this something we're seeing globally? Is it just Western society or first world countries, or is loneliness increasing everywhere?
Yeah, I can speak to first world countries the most. It seems like it's really growing everywhere. So of course, all these studies mostly are based in the United States, but for example, in London, they've appointed a minister of loneliness because it's such an issue in England as well. In Australia, it's either Australia or New Zealand. I'm pretty sure it's Australia. There's this program called Men's Sheds, and it's a program for men who are retired to come together and build things together, because the suicide rate there is the highest in men who are of retirement age, because they suddenly don't have connection. They don't know where to go. It's even harder for them to form intimacy with other men. There's not really this culture of like, oh, let's get together and like put my head on your shoulder and we can talk. So how do you get these people to come together? Through building things and conversation in that way. So it's definitely not just an issue in the United States.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen stats in the UK. I've seen it in Ireland. I've seen it in Australia. Um, but these are all, kind of in that Western society bucket. Um, and I am curious to see if in other cultures, not even necessarily, just not Westernized cultures, if loneliness is still prevalent, in countries where community is more built into their culture,
Mm-hmm.
or they're still reliant on kind of smaller groups.
Yeah, because that's the thing I struggle with living in New York City is it's so easy to constantly meet new people. And so my issue is a specific type of loneliness that a lot of people deal with, which is not obvious from the outside, which is I know so many people, I'm constantly meeting new people. Part of my job is meeting new people. And if I don't really prioritize deepening those relationships, then I'm still going to feel lonely. Even if I have a bunch of amazing conversations with people I just met, the depth of relationship is not there. And that's really the thing that creates a sense of belonging and a sense of connection.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm reading Sebastian Junger's book right now,
Yes,
Tribes,
that
which is
blew my mind.
incredible. Yeah,
It's,
it's really good. And
oh,
one of the things he said in there is like you can live in a city and literally only interact with strangers for 100% of your life.
mm-hmm.
And that's so different from how humans evolved, right? Because we used to be in small groups and interact deeply with a small group of people. But in
Mm-hmm.
a city, you can everything's kind of taken care of for you. You don't need to rely on each other in that deeper way.
Yeah. He also, there's a moment he talks about Mexican immigrants, how they can have exactly the same life in Mexico or America, but the second they get to America, the issues with mental health go like way up. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's clearly, this is a cultural problem if like pretty much everything else is the same, but they're going from a place where they're in community to a place in America where that's not valued. And we're so individualistic and we so base our value and sense of self-worth on productivity and work. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
clearly it's what it's Johann Hari calls it junk values of that we're taught that this is something that's good for us. When in reality, he calls it KFC for the soul. That like we're taught to be extrinsic and to get everything from the outside when really the things that truly charge us up and fill up our soul are the intrinsic things that we're taught to not value. So it's
Yeah.
messy.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit because there is definitely this individualistic society that many of us live in now. That's all about your own identity and your own career and being an individual, which is very different from what society was like for a very long time. Um, and I think it's relevant to that Brene Brown message of when I think it was Braving the Wilderness I read, where like the core message was that in order to belong, you need to belong to yourself. You're not going to find belonging from other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so those almost seem a little bit conflicting, right? It's like if we're too individualistic, we feel lonely. But if we seek belonging from others, we're lonely. So what's your take on that
How do we do
dichotomy?
it? Please help
Yeah.
me.
How do I fix this problem?
Yes. So actually, you mentioned this to me in an email, and I wrote down a quote from her. So she says that it's fear that stops us from connecting, fear of not belonging, of causing conflict, of not measuring up. And that true belonging is not passive, it's a practice that requires us to be vulnerable, get uncomfortable, and learn how to be present with people without sacrificing who we are. We want true belonging, but it takes tremendous amounts of courage to knowingly walk into hard moments. So I think a core point with that is that belonging is not as simple as just being like, oh, cool, I'm just going to show up and hang out with these people and I'm going to feel immediately like I belong. That there is this difficult inner work that is so overwhelmingly not talked about, that really the process of knowing ourselves is difficult and painful. There's a chapter in my book where I talk about the necessity of finding healing spaces in order to really feel in connection with ourselves and with others, because I feel like there is a culture in America of kind of whatever you've gone through, like that doesn't define you. Don't look at the past, move forwards, find a solution, be proactive, like positive psychology. When really there's this term called kind of like spiritual bypassing, meaning not looking at the difficult stuff and only looking at the light. So avoiding the dark, not looking, or avoiding the dark, not looking at the light. And this is a thing that I've dealt with as well, is kind of this lifetime feeling of no one understands me. Why can't I find deep connection? There's something wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with me. When in reality, I hadn't taken the time to understand myself and to look at my past and to see, why is it hard for me to accept love? Why is it hard for me to feel like I belong? And that's a difficult path to walk down. And that includes like looking at your trauma. And so it's just a thing that people don't want to talk about. It's like, oh, can't we just avoid this conversation? There in the Finding Healing Spaces chapter, I mention adverse childhood experiences, aka it's known as an ACE score. And you can have between 0 and 10 points. And each point is one thing from your childhood that is a traumatic experience. And a thing that I realized when I was kind of tallying up my own points is that there are a lot of things in this list that I wouldn't even have consciously seen as a trauma or a thing that could impact me for my whole life. And so that could be anything from living with someone who has a severe mental illness, to a family member going to prison, to just as simple as not feeling loved in your household. Simple, but you know what I mean? And so to see that score and to realize I'm carrying all of these things with me if I don't actively work on myself. And if I'm not actively working on these things from my childhood that I just have never wanted to look at because it's hard, I'm never going to feel like I belong.
That
It's a long rant.
Yeah.
Ooh, okay. I could just like go on forever.
And it's interesting. It's in that way. It's almost like self-fulfilling. If you don't have deep relationships, it's hard to go deep into your challenges and your struggles. But even if you have deep relationships, I have very close friends and family that loves me, and I love them. But there still aren't dedicated spaces for having those kinds of conversations.
Yes, which is why those spaces are so important. And I really feel like America needs more of them. These are two separate chapters. Is one, spaces where you can share with strangers. And those are so important because one, it's a safe space to talk about what's going on in your life without fear of judgment, because those people aren't in your life consistently. But also, and this is what's been the most impactful to me, is to hear other people sharing and to realize like, wow, me and this person actually have this thing in common. And it's a reminder that when I go out into the streets of New York City, everyone who's walking by me is dealing with something difficult. There's something going on in their lives, and that we're all connected in that way. And it's so easy to get caught in the trap of, nah, I'm the only person who has difficult stuff going on. My life is hard and everyone else has it figured out but me. And also to be able to have accessible spaces where you can process this trauma in a group setting, because as great as individual therapy is, it's really important to be in a group setting. And for example, I do this thing called Women Within, which is a weekend experience in a women's circle that allows women to process trauma together. And the power of having a woman stand up at the front and talk about her experience of being assaulted, and that maybe no one believed her when she told them, and that women said that she was a liar. And then to have all of these women sitting around her and to say like, I hear you and I believe you, and also this has happened to me. And to have her literally surrounded by a circle of support. You could never do that in individual therapy. It's just not possible. But these spaces are so few and far between, and also cost prohibitive, or it's a mostly white space. And so for people of color or people who are disabled, it's uncomfortable to be there. You don't feel welcome. there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area.
Mm. And so that's something interesting you said there, is that it's important to have groups of strangers, or at least people who aren't your close friends, aren't your close family, because maybe there are things you don't want to share in that group, but you feel a lot more comfortable in a group of people that you don't know that well, that won't, judge you based on your background, or you don't have to go see the next day at the office or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. It kind of applies in a lot of what people talk about with just deepening your friendships, just deepening your family relationships. Is actually, there's an argument to be made that you need a broader network, or at least alternative groups for specific types of interaction and sharing.
Totally. And especially if it's a specific issue that you're dealing with. Like, for example, this is why Alcoholics Anonymous is so amazing, because anytime you go, everyone there is sharing in this same experience of alcoholism. You don't feel judged because everyone understands, everyone can help you, and there's people there to lift you up who've been through the same thing, or sexual assault, or a dysfunctional family, all of these things. Huge shout out to Adult Children of Alcoholics, which is a great organization that also applies for people who just have dysfunctional families. Just these organizations are amazing. They're doing amazing.
Yeah. Really cool. So you touched on a couple of them in there, but pretty clear what some of the challenges are. Can you just kind of run through what are the 7 things that you recommend people do to create belonging or to fight loneliness?
I'm like, let me pull up my own list. So, because how embarrassing would that be if I literally forgot one of my own chapters of my book? That would be horrifying.
That's all right. I do that all the time. I'm like, I developed this framework over many years, but I don't remember exactly what it is.
Like, this book is like almost 300 pages long. I forget things. Okay. So 1 is getting friendtimate. So this means having intimacy in your friendships. That's 1. Communication, vulnerability. And also, like I said before, the importance of platonic touch. That a romantic partner cannot give us everything, even though in American culture we're kind of like, the romance is held above everything else as the thing that will solve all your problems and the thing that will make you happy, when in reality we need a rich network of friendships to really fill us up in all the ways. That's 1. 2 is spaces that create an alternate universe. So these are spaces that are a model in some way or another of the type of world that you want to live in. And that could even just be something as simple as, this is a space where phones aren't allowed because we want to be present with each other. Or this is a space where there's not drinking because we want to be present with our uncomfortable emotions. Something as simple as that. The next one is, as I said before, sharing with strangers, and also seeking spiritual guidance, because with this absence of organized religion in America, we still have a spiritual life. And where do we go to find mentorship, spiritual or otherwise? I reference a study. There's like a child screaming outside. I reference a study that shares how few children have mentors in America. Oh man, I'm not going to remember the statistic, but it's shocking how many kids are looking for literally one adult in their life who can help them out. There's so many children in America who have no mentorship at all of any adults in their life, and how powerful it is to have someone to kind of guide you along the path. So that's the next one. And then finding healing spaces. I talked about that before. Mm-hmm. And then incorporating ritual, which is another thing that it's just, for me, there's something that happens when I drop into a space where there's the same ritual every time. It's a sense of being connected to something that's bigger than myself, of being connected to the people in the space, of feeling cared for, that this is just a thing that happens over and over and over again. It's really beautiful. And I know the people in this community, I'm sure, understand why ritual is important. But for people who aren't necessarily in this world, thinking about how you can incorporate little rituals into your everyday life to feel connected to yourself and to other people. And the last one, the one that people in this community have already just nailed, is stepping into leadership. So being the person who creates the type of spaces that you want to see in the world, and that if there's a community that you're not seeing that you want, to be the person to create that space, because that's what the world needs.
And so I'm curious, for the people in this group, many of them are building community for an organization or part of their work. But it brings all these interesting dynamics into play. I think a lot of people in this space are in the work because they care about all the things we just talked about making people feel a sense of belonging, about providing them that support, about creating safe spaces. But then it's also this to be unique in that transactional relationship that a business has with a customer or with employees or partners. And so, can businesses do this authentically, or is it kind of bullshit when a company tries to create authentic spaces for people to connect?
Yeah, I think it's very possible. And actually, this is the thing, honestly, I struggle with this, that there's a part of me that's such the artist soul that's just like, no, community and business have no part with each other. And I struggle with that. And then I had a friend challenge me and he said, so Jillian, are you saying that the people who spend a third of their life at work, that they don't deserve connection? I was like, well, shit, okay. You have a point.
Yeah.
And so actually when I was writing the book, I created a list of 5 elements of a healthy congregation. And these were things that I noticed in all the spaces where I went and I felt really safe and like I belonged. And I'm looking at the list right now, and these are all things that a company could definitely do, especially if it's for like a weekly team meeting, if it's a consistent gathering that happens within the company. And so quickly, the 5 things are that 1, these gatherings happen every week. And this is also kind of based off of a church. 2, the same people show up consistently. 3, there is space for vulnerable conversation and reflection. 4, there is mentorship and spiritual guidance, especially from elders. And 5, there is an easily accessible way for members to give back to the community. And all of those things, I think, are very possible in a corporate setting. And actually, a lot of them are already pretty built in just because of the fact that you're going to an office, you have probably some sort of ritualized meetings. I'm guessing for most companies, the most difficult is vulnerability and having a space to share the things that people are struggling with, because like mentorship, typically built in, people being able to give back to each other in the community, in the company, that's usually built in as well. And thoughtful companies, hopefully the same.
Yeah, the vulnerability in a company, I mean, it is, it's probably the most rare, because businesses generally don't have a culture of like bring your personal life and problems and vulnerability to work. Yeah. It generally has a mentality or a message of like, get your, do your job, do it well. Like you have to hit this goal. It's very kind of alpha in that way.
Yeah.
And it feels messy to add that to the clean world of business, is to say we're going to create spaces for vulnerability and conversation like that. And same for customers as well, right? It's not just employees.
And I understand the fear of the messiness and kind of the fear of, oh, if we do this, things are going to go off the rails and it's not going to be work appropriate and people are going to have these weird loose boundaries. There's a story I share in the book of this man, Chris Shembra, who has a dinner series called the 747 Club. And it's a dinner series. It's genius. I say in the book, I'm like, I wish I thought of this idea. It's so good. He hosts dinner parties, oftentimes for people in the venture capital world, to get together with their clients. And there's no work talk. It's just a way for them to bond with everyone, not clients, potential clients. And he asks them one question, which is, who is the person in your life that you have not given enough thanks to, and why? And when I met Chris 2 years ago, he said that his metric for success was that one person at the dinner cries. And now, I could not believe this when he said this to me. Now his metric for success, because the dinners have gotten a little bit bigger, he's been doing this for longer, his metric for success is that 6 people cry. So he's creating a space where there's no conversation about work. I have this story in my head of like, oh, these venture capital dudes, they're not going to be down to be vulnerable. They're going to think this is weird and woo-woo and hippie and stupid. When in reality, they're forging these amazing bonds with each other. They're seeing each other as human beings. And that makes them want to work with each other more. And it makes them trust each other more. And so it's great for their business deals because it's like, yeah, I want to do business with this guy who I just saw crying about how much he misses his mom. He's a real human being. I trust him. And when I see people vulnerable, I trust them more.
And I'm reflecting on events I went to where I cried and others cried, and there's more vulnerability, and just like there's still relationships. Some people I haven't even spoken to in a couple of years, but just recently actually someone messaged me, and I immediately, like, there's immediate trust there because of that experience that we had together that I haven't had with, I go to countless conferences or events. I don't have that same kind of trust with people I meet there.
Yeah. I really believe, and this is a thing that I want to work on creating in the world, is just more spaces for people to be in their messy emotions and for people to cry and to scream and to just these emotions that we barely have space for in our lives anymore. And they're just all stuck inside of our bodies. And really, we need to let these things out. And when we do it with other people, we bond.
Is it only really possible in small groups? Because a lot of us are building communities that have hundreds or thousands or even millions of members. A lot of them are online, kind of community at scale. So is really the only way to create these kinds of bonds or to fight loneliness to have these smaller groups?
Well, I think for this kind of getting together, at the level of getting together, being in person, crying, having these vulnerable moments, I think in a circle, like even just a circle of 200 people, that's not possible, at least for me and the experiences that I've been in. Of course, you go to a Tony Robbins event, that's like, 2,000 people in a room and people are losing their minds.
I went to one with 10,000. Everyone cried. All 10,000 people.
The thing that's interesting is that, so with Tony Robbins, 10,000 people in a room, but also, because I interviewed the volunteer coordinator for Tony Robbins for my book, that they have these small pods or like these small groups of people that are consistently meeting. It's maybe 15 people. And that it's a core element of the experience is that, yes, you have this giant group catharsis and you're dancing and it's amazing and it's more powerful because there's so many people and you're all doing the same thing. But then to go and to be able to share vulnerably with the same people over and over again is a really important part of feeling like you can trust people. So perhaps for these online communities, if you take that same model of, yes, there's a big group experience where perhaps a few people are spotlighted in their vulnerability, but then you go and you have these small group experiences as well, ideally with people consistently, because otherwise you kind of feel connected to this weird amorphous blob of people who you're not really connected to.
Yeah, it becomes more transactional. I go there when I have a broad question for a broad group rather than feeling like I can really go deep with a small group.
Yeah.
I think it aligns with the overall trend that we're seeing where everything went really big, social networks went big, everything kind of growing a lot in our networks. And now we're like, oh shit, what we actually need is more intimacy and small groups. And I think it's the same in our communities, and something that I'm finding a lot of doing. They're breaking down this really large experience, which is great. It's good, like, to have an ongoing space that people can kind of come and touch base and connect. But then to create smaller experiences, whether they're local events or subgroups or online calls with just a group of people, to take that really large community and let the people within that interact in smaller, more intimate ways.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. I totally agree.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We have a good question here from Fawn on this topic as well. Fawn asked, would in real life meetings or in-person meetings affect an online community's safe space that may depend on anonymity?
Ooh, that's a really interesting question. I guess I'm curious what an example of an online space would be where everyone wants to be anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
I'd imagine maybe it's something around like sexual health questions or relationship questions, something like that. Uh, I guess for an in-person meeting, unless you're not exchanging names or contact information there, and that could be a possibility, is like we're getting together for this conversation. We're not allowed to exchange any information. We're not even using our real names. That could be something that's possible. Otherwise, yeah, then I think that could be a case for online only being safer for people, because perhaps this is a situation where people only feel comfortable being vulnerable when people don't know who they are.
Right. I think to add to that, and I don't know if you'll agree with this, but I think like the reason that those communities are anonymous is because that creates safety for
Mm-hmm.
people, right? They can share things in this big community, this big public community, without fear of judgment if it's anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what a small group does as well, is create safety, because you know, okay, I can see everyone in this room, we have rules. I know that like what I share here isn't going to leave the room, right? Like Alcoholics Anonymous has anonymous in the name. You're not anonymous to each other, but it's meant to be like, this is a safe space. Whatever you share here is not going to be shared elsewhere. So I think if you have an online community that's anonymous, there's a good chance that those people would be interested in an in-person gathering as well, as long as the online remained anonymous fully, but the offline remained like what's shared in that group stays in that group.
Yeah. The Internet Freedom Festival is a really good example of that, where I think their online community, a lot of people stay anonymous because of just protection and privacy.
Yeah.
But the in-person, people are so excited to be with
Yeah.
other people who are in that space because it's so niche.
Right. Just don't share your username with other people so you can stay anonymous online.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thanks, Fawn. Super interesting. And so, okay, so businesses can start applying this. And by the way, if anyone has more questions like what Fawn asked, please, as a reminder, you can share it in the chat here, in the Q&A, in the Facebook group. We're watching it everywhere. We had a nice comment in the Facebook group. Chris said he's gonna hug his wife now.
Oh.
Yes, hug your wives. They're
Hug
great
your
for.
wives, hug your roommates, hug your friends, hug yourself, hug everyone.
Hug yourself.
As long as it's
That's right. I'm
consensual.
hugging myself right
We're just like.
now. So I mean, you know, I think like where do you see things going now on a broad level, with technology and capitalism and society all being about kind of growing and growing and growing? Are we going to see this kind of pushback to technology driving more intimacy? Do we need these vulnerable spaces just because we don't have the connection that we used to have? And so it's creating all this drama for us that we need to have these spaces to interact. Like, where do we go from here as a society?
Yeah, that is a great question. I struggle with this because I see some companies that are doing really powerful things, like some co-living spaces where they're big and they're expanding and they're genuinely creating spaces where people can, at the very least, be in connection with others instead of being alone by themselves. And just that is really powerful. I'm like, yeah, that's people capitalizing on a social problem. But it's for good reason, especially in cities like New York, where it's so easy to either live with roommates who you don't like, and then you're kind of stuck in that situation, or to live on your own and not talk to other people. It's a really awesome solution. But from my perspective, the things that I'm starting to see people really gravitating to are these retreats and experiences to just reconnect us to the wildness of humanity that we've kind of really removed from. Just, I feel like this is a big reason why retreats are getting so much more popular. And it seems like instead of going on vacations now, so many people I know are just going on retreats. Is because we're desperate for this sense of just like being in nature and exercising and eating good food and being in connection with other people, having cathartic experiences, things that used to be embedded in the way that we lived. And now we're so far removed from it that in the meantime, while we're figuring out how to kind of integrate all of these things into our life, to have an experience that's a touch point for what is actually possible is so important. It's been really important for me with all of the retreats that I've gone to, because I'm a total retreat junkie. I love it. Is that it reminds me of how much I can feel, how connected I can feel to other people, how grounded and present I can be. Because in the way that my day-to-day life is structured, to be honest, I don't have a lot of that stuff all the time.
Yeah. Are there things that all of us, you know, working in online communities, working with digital platforms, are there things that the internet can do to kind of combat this loneliness epidemic that in some ways it helped cause?
Yeah, well, I think one thing, so with my newsletter, I start every newsletter with a vulnerable story from my week. Because my fear was, oh, I'm going to start this thing called the Joy List. People are going to assume that I'm this super happy, shiny, bubbly young woman who, like, nothing's going wrong in my life, and I'm going to become one of those Instagram influencer people who is part of the problem. And so to remind people every week, you're not alone in your shit. Like, everyone is dealing with stuff, including me. And so I'm always sharing what's going on in my life. And the internet is a great place to do that. Recently, for example, my book came out, and I realized I was looking at my own online presence and saw, like, ooh, this is starting to look too shiny. Like, everything is perfect. And, oh, I'm getting this press, and I have these interviews, and I'm speaking at these things, and, like, look at how awesome my life is. And so I made a point to post and say, listen, I've been feeling really overwhelmed. I realize I'm stepping into a new period in my life, and I feel like the ground is shifted under me, and I'm feeling really anxious, and I'm like randomly starting to cry because I have no plan for what's going on in my life right now. And it looks awesome, and I have no clue what's happening with me in the next few months. I'm kind of just taking it as it comes, and that's really, really scary. And people were so appreciative. So I think, and I shared that with more people than I ever could have in one-on-one conversations. So I think like 200 people or something commented on it saying, thank you for sharing this. Some people even saying like, I felt really jealous and I was starting to compare myself to you, and that this helped kind of give a reality check of like what's actually happening.
Yeah. So what are your tips for if we're running a community, could be of customers or members or employees or anyone, what can we do to encourage our members to share more openly and vulnerably in those spaces?
Yeah, well, I think it's really leading by example. So for example, with my newsletter, it also has a monthly event called the Joylist Social. And it's just a space for New Yorkers to come and meet other people who want to make new friends. And people have come up to me and said, because you share something vulnerably in your newsletter every week, I feel really comfortable being vulnerable here because I know that's the culture. I know that people here value that. So for example, if you're a moderator in a group, you can't expect people to be vulnerable in that group if you're not sharing something yourself that's kind of difficult to share. And I feel like there's a fear of, oh, if I share this, then people won't trust me. They won't trust this group anymore. But like I said before, when people are vulnerable, it actually increases trust. It increases loyalty because that type of vulnerability is so rare.
Mm. Okay, so modeling the behavior, really good one. Anything else that we can do to create kind of spaces that encourage people? Because I know I've been vulnerable in the CMX group before in the community, and then everyone's like, cool. And then There's
Good
no
job.
follow-up. So how do we pull it out of them? How do we, or is pulling it out of them not the right approach? Do you just need to create the space for them to do it on their own time?
One other tip that I have is to remind people what they have in common. This is the thing that I do online, and I also do it in my events, is something as simple as, hey, for my event, everyone here is here because they want to make new friends. They are giving their time and their money to do this. And you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't connect with somebody, because that's why we showed up. And so that could be for CMX, we're all here because we want to create connection. We want to make the world a less lonely place. We want to model the love that we want to see in the world. Like, how can we do that? And it's just, again, it's giving people permission to do that, and maybe even giving a prompt. I think with a lot of these things, it's so new and it's so uncommon that it's kind of like, well, what would I even say that would be vulnerable or appropriate in this space? Because there's a fear of, like, it's not appropriate to share. What are they talking about? Like, what kind of thing would be okay?
Do you have any favorite prompts?
One that I was at a dinner party recently, and they asked everyone to share in a minute. Where have you been? Where are you now? Where are you going? And it was really awesome because it gave people permission to kind of share their story at whatever level of vulnerability they wanted, and whatever was going on in their life. So some people could keep it really career focused. Other people could talk about, like, their relationship to their body or their relationship to their dad or whatever. So that's one. Another really easy one that, again, people go whatever level of vulnerability they want is, what's something that you're struggling with right now, and what's something that you're really excited about right now? Super easy. Someone could be like, oh, I'm struggling with coding this thing, or something way deeper, whatever you want.
Got it. I really like that prompt. I may have to borrow that sometime.
Go for it. Oh my God. If you ever need prompts, please let me know. Thinking of these is my favorite.
I love brainstorming prompts. I think it depends on the group and what you're really trying to get them to do, but
Totally.
especially for conferences, right? Like, I open up our event, I always think about what's something I can get everyone to say to each other real fast that is actually meaningful and might actually create an opportunity for more connection.
Ooh, I have one more. I did this at the end of my startup grind talk. It was, close your eyes, think of someone who loves you a lot. Now introduce yourself from the perspective of that person. So, like, introduce yourself like your mom would introduce you.
Right.
Or your friend would introduce you.
Yeah, I love that one.
People this removal to suddenly brag about themselves.
Yeah.
It's like, talk about yourself in the third person, and then it's okay.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I saw that's
she's crying now.
I told you we were going to get people to cry.
This is a safe space. Yeah, that's a metric of success.
Like, laughing like a crazy person.
And Kate asked if you could share some of your favorite retreats that you would recommend.
Ooh, okay. Well, so I mentioned Woman Within before, which is a great one if you're looking for sisterhood, for connecting to yourself. If there's any trauma in your life, it's beautiful for that. The men's version is Mankind Project. There's also a thing called Everyman. It's EVRYMAN. Also, really anything, if you just Google digital detox retreats, of course, anything in that category I'm going to love. And then if you want to get real edgy with it, if you just would, like, really want to go on the edge of human experience, like I love doing, there's this thing called ISTA, which stands for the Institute of Sacred Temple Arts. It's a mystery school. So you essentially show up, you have no idea what's going to happen to you. Also, just Google mystery school if you want to get, like, really shamanic and mysterious with it. So those are the things I will recommend. I recommend the weird, edgy things that have terrible marketing, because I'm like, these are the things that are the coolest to me, and people never hear about them.
Absolutely. I want to look that up now.
Go for it. Highly recommend.
And last question. which, you know, talking about mystery schools and all this vulnerability and all this stuff. And you mentioned before, sometimes people hear this stuff and they're like, oh, it's kind of woo woo or crunchy, or like it just kind of feels lame. Like sometimes sometimes I make people just take a shared breath when I open a talk, and I'd get a comment like, you know, what are we in San Francisco? But then everyone loves it when they actually do it. So I'm curious if you have an opinion on, I think like once people experience these things, everyone all of a sudden becomes really human and connected to it and feels a value. But getting people over that mentality of this is lame or hippie or whatever is a barrier. And so how do we communicate things in a way that feels, I don't know, relatable or less awkward for people, that kind of opens up that opportunity for them to engage without in a way judging themselves for like doing something silly?
Yeah. Well, I think one is acknowledging that these experiences aren't for everyone, and that chances are if someone's like hardcore judging it, they might not be ready for it, and that's okay. But also in terms of marketing, like I kind of joked, a lot of these experiences that are amazing, their marketing is garbage. And so the advice that I would give to anyone who has an experience that might be a little bit on the edge or not totally mainstream is just to say to people, what are you struggling with right now? Like, do you feel X, Y, and Z thing in your life? Do you want X, Y, and Z improvement? This experience is for you. You don't even have to say what it is. And typically that'll get people's attention, especially if you're talking like personal development bro man who is really attached to kind of like quantifiable results. That's a great way to get people. And kind of like how Tony Robbins does this. He's a perfect example of like super macho. You think you're going to talk about fitness and money, and that's all you're going to do. And then suddenly you're doing a meditation and you're crying and you're thinking about your mom. Like, going into Tony Robbins, you don't think that's going to happen because he doesn't market himself that way, and smartly so. He's so popular, and he talks about energy. He talks about meditation, all these things, but it's not the way that he markets himself. He like sneaks it in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, he is good at putting it in a framing that feels very relatable and valuable and relevant. But I remember even when I went there the first day, I was like, man, like everyone around me was clapping and cheering and knew exactly how to respond. I was like, you're all lame. I'm not going to do this. I'm too cool to do this. And I just like didn't get anything out of it the first day. And it was a 3-day event. And then the second day, I went in with the mentality of like, screw it, I'm here. Let me just like give it a shot, and started like clapping and screaming and having fun with it and letting loose. And my friends and I all sat away from each other so we wouldn't like feel awkward in front of each other. And all of a sudden, like it was hugely impactful and learned a lot. And so sometimes you just, like you said, people just need to be ready for it and come to that point on their own. Awesome. Any last messages you'd like to share with the audience? Anything you'd like to send them to, promote?
Yeah, so I would say that if you are an organization that wants to create an event that fosters connection, or if you want to create more connection within your own company, I would love to talk to you, because this is the work that I do. I'm figuring out how exactly to create more connection in these corporate spaces. And if you're someone who's really excited to figure that out, I would love to talk to you. And so my email is hey@joylist.nyc. And also my website is thatjillian.com. And my book, as you mentioned before, is Unlonely Planet. And give it a review, because this is the thing I didn't realize, is that for people who are self-published or through a small publisher like I am, once you get 100 reviews, that's when traditional publishers start to reach out, and that's when Amazon starts to recommend your book to other people. So my book just came out. I have 5 reviews right now. So if you could review my book, that would be amazing. That's what I got.
That's a good ask. It's a good call to action. And the last one I'll have is just a reminder, Jillian will be speaking at CMX Summit on the main stage, September 5th and 6th. 1,000 community professionals, lots of amazing experts, speakers, over 65 speakers. It's going to be an incredible event. We hope to see you all there. You all get 20% off for attending this webinar. If you use the code Jillian Webinar by Monday, you get 20% off your tickets. It's going to be incredible. We hope to see you all there. And we can't wait to learn more from you, Jillian, and get even more insight from your book and on this very important topic.
Yeah,
so thank you so much.
We're gonna breathe together.
Oh yeah, we're gonna make everyone real uncomfortable and vulnerable. Awesome. Thanks so much, Jillian. Really appreciate the time. Thanks for sharing all your wisdom, and we'll see you soon.
All right.
Bye, everyone.